Okay. So we will begin. So hello everyone, and welcome to Luxembourg for Transparency's first Transparency in Practice webinar. My name is Lena Hoffman, and I am delighted to be the moderator for today's session on Luxembourg and the future of open governance. Today's webinar is hosted by Luxembourg for Transparency in partnership with the European Technology and Intelligence for Citizens initiative. It is part of the Open Gov Week, which is the global initiative of the Open Government Partnership to promote open, accountable, and participatory governance. While Luxembourg formally withdrew from the OGP framework in 2023, it has continued to modernize its public sector through several waves of digitalization strategies. The current approach, which is described as digital by default, is framed by a national action plan to improve digital access for citizens. But our focus for today is not on the details of these strategies, but on what they mean in practice for meaningful transparency, real citizen engagement, and for genuine access to information. So to help us unpack these, we brought together a brilliant panel of 5. So we have a mid-hour ahead of us, and each one of our panelists could hold this conversation single-handedly. So really appreciate that we've all agreed to convene on these topics. And we'll be looking at open data, access to information, how international and local civil society work together or can work together, and what deliberative democracy means in unique Luxembourg's context. So a quick word on the format, so you know what to expect. We structured the discussion into 2 rounds, and we're keeping the slide presentations at a minimum, just in the first segment. In the first round, each panelist has 7 minutes to respond to the core landscape and trend questions they've been given, just as prompts. And you will find these questions posted in the chat alongside the bios of each of our panelists. In the second round, it will be more action focused. So each panelist will present their concrete recommendations, kind of steps looking forward. And then we'll open up for questions, and you can use the chat function as well as the raise hand function. If we come to the 1 hour mark, we'll wrap up the recorded formal program. But as we mentioned in the emails you received, we have a flow into an optional 15-minute extended dialogue for those who would be interested in staying behind for an extra exchange. So with that, we're going to dive into the first round, beginning with the foundation of open governance, which is data. And starting with Jameson Henninger, who is joining us from DC. It's 6 a.m. for him, so we can't thank you enough for this level of commitment. Jameson joins us from the Open Data Watch, and you'll find his bio in the chat. And he'll be setting the scene for us using their open data inventory. So Jameson, good morning. What story does the open data inventory tell of Luxembourg's strengths and gaps in data openness? And how does it compare globally? And what do national data producers prioritize? So the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. And good morning, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I'm very pleased to do so. And like it's been said, I'm going to provide some scene setting for this panel. I'm going to focus on one practical foundation of open governance, which is open government data. And I'm really using the results from our global open data assessment, which we call the Open Data Inventory, or ODIN for short, to look at what it suggests about Luxembourg's open government data ecosystem. So I do have some slides to share for this conversation, so one second. Oh, there we go. So before I turn to ODIN and the Open Data Inventory, I wanted to start with the open data value chain because it keeps us focused on why all of this matters. So open data is not just about uploading files to a portal. Government data producers already do a tremendous amount of work to collect, validate, publish data, but the real public value of that work depends on what happens after the publications. So for data to create value, users need to be able to find it, understand it, trust it, and in order to reuse it. But the real impact comes when the data are applied in policy, oversight, research, journalism, and when that feedback from those uses helps improve the data system itself. So that means that open data principles need to be reflected throughout the full data value chain. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to come back to this one basic question about what can Luxembourg do to increase the value of the data that it already produces. All right. So to answer that question, ODIN gives us a practical lens. It looks at government statistics, government open data from the perspective of a user, and asks whether someone outside the government can find, understand, download, and reuse key public data across major policy areas. So this matters for open governance because official statistics help make public issues visible and measurable, and they support public decisions, policy decisions, public debates, monitoring, and accountability. Right. So ODIN doesn't assess every data set that a country publishes, but it looks at a representative set of high value indicators across social, economic, and environmental topics. So we look at both two dimensions: coverage of data, so how much data are available over time, disaggregated, and then openness looks at whether that data are usable, machine readable, downloadable, documented with metadata, and published with clear reuse terms. So ODIN helps us identify where important data may be missing or insufficiently disaggregated for usable purposes, and whether data exists but maybe are not yet easy enough to understand or reuse. So let's take a look at the Luxembourg results. So this map shows ODIN's most recent results covering 198 countries. So it gives us a broad global comparison of the availability and openness of government open data. But turning to Luxembourg, the 2024 results show an overall ODIN score of just 65 out of 100. And Luxembourg ranks 61st out of 198 countries globally. So within Western Europe, it's around the middle of the group, about 6 out of 9 countries overall. So the most important point that I want to make here is this gap between coverage and openness. Luxembourg's coverage score is just 54, while its openness score is 75. And that tells us that when data are available, they're generally relatively open, but users still face a lot of gaps when priority data sets are missing and not disaggregated in ways that make that data useful to them. So this 2024 snapshot gives us the current picture, and then the next slide will show us a little bit about changes over time in these scores. So the trend over time gives us a more nuanced story. Since 2018, Luxembourg's overall score has improved from about 57 to 65. Coverage increased from 41 to 54, which is definitely real progress. It suggests that there's been some kind of intentional improvement to make more key data available. But at the same time, the coverage score shows that there's still some gaps, right? So, and then openness has remained much higher than coverage. It fell up to from 81 to 75 in 2024. But I'd read this less as a decline in commitment per se, and more as evidence of uneven implementation of openness across the data ecosystem. So the lesson is that coverage and openness need to move together. Making more detailed data available is important, but the value of the data really increase to the public when that data is also made open. So this is the lens I'll use to kind of discuss the kind of main recommendations that come out of the most recent assessments. So the first recommendation is to close some of these high value coverage gaps. Luxembourg's coverage score shows that there's still important gaps in what they can find. And the priority areas where we found these gaps are things like data on living conditions, education and health outcomes, food security and nutrition, and many of the environmental issues. So it's not just one category or one subtopic. It really is kind of an issue that goes across many of these very important topics. And disaggregation is especially important. One of the key reasons why coverage scores were lower, particularly the lack of sex disaggregated data, and as well as a lack of subnational level data. So even in a small country, geographic disaggregation can matter for service access, housing, transport, environmental exposure, right? So these are key disaggregations that really need to be prioritized. Okay, second, one of the main reasons why openness scores were a little bit lower was the lack of really complete metadata. And so just for comparison, Luxembourg's metadata score is about 50 in 2024, which is very much lower than the other kind of openness elements we look at, such as open formats, which was more in the 80s. So this is one of the clearest areas where openness can be strengthened. And the gap is fairly basic. You know, ODIN doesn't look at whether countries are using SDMX metadata standards. We're really looking for very basic reference metadata. And so definitions and concepts were one of the biggest gaps that we found in most of Luxembourg's data sets. So users need to know what the data actually measure, what population and time period is included, and whether definitions have changed over time. So without that context, data may technically be available, but it's still difficult to compare, trust, and reuse. So the metadata is less of just this technical requirement. It's more of one of the most practical ways to increase the value of the data that Luxembourg is already publishing, and a way to increase the reuse of that data by increasing the confidence in that data. And lastly, the third recommendation is one of the most important recommendations I give to countries when we do these technical capacity trainings across different regions in the world. And this is to coordinate standards across agencies and access points. So Luxembourg has a strong open data foundation, open data policy, a national open data portal. But from the user experience that from their perspective, the experience can still vary depending on where someone starts, whether you're on the open data portal or the ministry website or the National Statistical Office website. There's a lot of variation in the openness of the data and what you're going to find. So this variation, like I said, is super common across countries, but it can create confusion. Users might not know which license applies, if the data set appears on two different websites with two different licenses, or whether there's a better data set more appropriate for their use available somewhere else. So licensing, formats, download options, metadata should all be treated as kind of these coordination issues. And the goal is not to make every website identical, but the goal is to make the openness pathway clear and predictable wherever users are accessing public official data. So that is our key recommendations from the Open Data Inventory, and hopefully a good scene setting view of open data, open governments in Luxembourg. So I'm happy to take questions when we get to that point, but thank you. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so very much, Jameson. That's really an excellent picture of the value chain, and also the point you make about coverage and openness needing to move together. So really key data clarity there. So we're just going to move from these data metrics to global policy frameworks. And we're joined by Paul Braithwaite, bringing the OGP's perspective as the regional lead for Europe. Again, you will see his full bio in the chat. So hi, Paul. So looking back at 15 years of OGP's experience, what engagement models and practices have worked best for just the range of countries involved in the OGP, and particularly for small states such as Luxembourg? And what lessons do you think Luxembourg can learn or offer in terms of strengthening transparency and openness? The floor is yours for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Lena. I'm very happy to be here. Happy Open Gov Week, everybody. If this is the only Open Gov Week event you're currently signed up for, do check the Open Gov Week website for other online events around the world, which you may be able to join. But yeah, I'm especially delighted to be here speaking to a Luxembourg audience because we miss Luxembourg in OGP. And even though the government might not be a formal member at the moment, all of you are a very integral part of the global OGP community. So for those of you who don't know OGP already, we bring together governments and civil society in a proven model that turns openness into better policy, smarter spending, and stronger public trust. So we have over 5,600 reforms already implemented across our 75 national members and 150 local government members. So it's a recognized framework that turns reforms into results that make a real difference for people. There are some sort of core principles of the OGP model. Right at the heart of it is that civil society government collaboration and co-creation. And we know from the data over OGP's 15 years to date that when government and civil society collaborate, that results in more ambitious reforms. It results in reforms that are more likely to be implemented and reforms that are more likely to produce results that have a benefit for real people, for citizens. It's therefore obviously an action-oriented platform, a broad-based action-oriented platform. There are reforms, any reforms that advance the core principles of transparency, accountability, and public participation are part and parcel of the open government movement. And the other factor that's inbuilt is accountability. That accountability is located both in terms of the relationship at national level between government and civil society, but also at the partnership level, where we have an independent reporting mechanism that produces periodic reports of how members are performing against their commitments and pulls out lessons learned. Turning to the kind of small states aspect of it, many small states are members of OGP. Just within the EU, we have Malta, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, for example. As well as EU accession countries like Montenegro, Kosovo, North Macedonia. And being small is definitely no barrier. In fact, it can be an advantage. I think of proximity to decision makers, close-knit networks, ability to innovate. Estonia, as everybody probably knows, is a real front runner on digital government and progresses that through its OGP platform as well. North Macedonia, on the other hand, has used the open state lens to advance its OGP process. So it has the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive branches all involved in their OGP process. So as I'm sure you know, Luxembourg was a member of OGP from 2016 through to 2022. There was a national action plan in 2019 with several commitments around open data, also transparent and open administration, using plain and simple language in public administration, and I think as well a Center for Civic Tech, which I think some of the people on the call were involved with. So we would, of course, love to have Luxembourg back in OGP, and the country does remain eligible to rejoin at any time. However, we do recognize that that might take some time and some persuading. OGP has been continuing to evolve as a platform in the meantime, and some of those changes might help address some of the stated reasons for Luxembourg's withdrawal, and I can come on to that in a moment. But of course, countries don't have to be members of OGP to pursue open governance. The model is there. All of our guidance and resources are freely available, including how to run a co-creation process, as well as a vast array of knowledge products and data on any range of open government themes. So I think at some point in the chat, we'll pop up a link to the Open Gov guide, which I'd really recommend digging into. But all but a few European countries are actually members of OGP. However, there are some, and I think of Iceland in particular, that do score very strongly on open government and embrace many of the principles, but they aren't official members. Although they have taken part in some OGP activities as observers. Maybe that's something that Luxembourg could consider in future. And others started an open government reform process before ultimately joining OGP. So I think of Kosovo as an example of that, who had an open government reform process and action plans, and then eventually in 2023 became a formal OGP member. In terms of broad-based, engagement models and practices in terms of what works, and this is true whether you're part of OGP or not, some of the core things I think would be, obviously you need willing partners in both government and civil society. So the core is the collaboration. So you need will on both sides, and you need political support as well. So you can have very productive conversations at working and technical level, but if without the political support, those can get stuck at that kind of micro level, or indeed they might progress along a more ambitious line but get blocked down the road if they're not aligned with political aspirations. Important also to identify concrete windows of opportunity in your own context. Those could be open government elements in the existing government's program, or that arise through political developments or matters of public debate. But it's good probably to focus on a small number of issues, especially if you're building a process from the ground up, something that's realistic to address within the constraints of stakeholders' capacities. And that's both on the civil society and the government side. I think a common issue is kind of a lack of recognition of the capacity constraints on both sides, both within the civil service and within civil society. Making the most of existing forums and mechanisms is also a really important thing to do. Many countries do have dedicated OGP forums, but you don't need to have one if other similar mechanisms already exist. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. So whatever is there in terms of dialogue already between government and civil society, those can be made use of, perhaps enhanced. And I think finally, just to be really clear about the benefits to government as well, whether that be in terms of delivery for citizens, but also open government reform can deliver cost savings, reduce corruption. It can be a boost to economic growth, better policy outcomes, and ultimately improving public trust as well. So being really clear about what government gets out of its engagement in an open government reform process. So there is a link there in the chat about kind of how countries can join OGP, and I think as well the Open Gov guide will be there. Moving on just in terms of saying a little bit more about what lessons from other countries that help Luxembourg as it grapples with balancing administrative capacity and advancing stronger transparency and civic participation. One thing maybe to highlight, as I mentioned before, is that OGP is a flexible mechanism, but we have also introduced recently some changes to our action framework that make it even more flexible than before. And that was in part a response to the experience of countries like Luxembourg, where there was a sense that the OGP model just didn't quite fit with how they did things, and it resulted in too much of an administrative burden. So one aspect of this had been in the past the misalignment of policy cycles with the deadlines for the publication of OGP action plans. So now that has been significantly changed. So we've changed the unit of action from the action plan, which is a document that contains multiple commitments that would all be published at one time, to the action commitment. So it means that countries can now publish individual commitments at a time of their choosing. So that means that it allows ample time for dialogue with civil society on specific policy topics and publication of commitments at different times that suits and aligns with government cycles. And there are other changes as well. The maximum length of a commitment can be up to 6 years now. There aren't any fixed deadlines for submission of action plans in the same way there used to be. And we do use different metrics to assess whether or not a country is active. There are still consequences, obviously, for a country that is completely inactive in OGP, but we measure that in a different way. And also we're making more distinction between what are small technical breaches of process versus more fundamental ones. And I think sometimes that got hung up in the detail in some places. Lena, you wanted to come in?
Yes, I just wanted to say we were at time.
Okay. Let me just quickly round off then. Did you want to come? I was trying to address the two questions that you gave me. Did you want me to only address one for now?
I think you've highlighted the co-creation process and the importance of political support. So I think these are key recommendations that I think Sana can come in on as someone who was involved in the processes leading up to Luxembourg becoming part of the OGP, and as well as the exit. So I think that's a good point in which Sana can come in. And Sana, you can draw on your experience at ETICC, the work of ETICC, and working with the OGP and that the period of entry and exit. So from your experience, can you tell us which civil society strategies you've seen have been effective in terms of these, the issues raised by Paul around political support? How do you galvanize it? How do you ensure coordination? Paul spoke about aligning policy cycles and action plans. So what really happens on the ground. If you could give us that perspective, and where you see there is potential for deepening citizen participation here in Luxembourg, within or without, outside of the OGP framework. So
Yes.
you also have 7 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the question. Absolutely. We were very happy actually to collaborate with the OGP at this time before COVID period. And yeah, we were quite astonished also to see Luxembourg withdrawing itself from the partnership. However, we, as a civil society organization, as we are not government actor, we are civil society organization. We suggested actually some ways of collaboration also to OGP to see how we can even continue to collaborate all together. But we understood that without any government support, the collaboration will be difficult. So this is one of the challenges we faced by ETICC also, to not be able then to create more collaboration at international level with other international partners such as OGP. This is you mentioned it, political will is definitely the key. Without it, we cannot just pursue the goals. I have some key takeaways also to share, definitely, if I want to come back to the work of ETICC during this period. So maybe I can start with that, and then we can come back to the discussion regarding our experience as well. If there is one key takeaway message also to share, it will be probably this one: accountability and public engagement. I mean, doesn't happen simply because participation mechanism exists. They happen when participation is trusted, structured, and leads to visible impact. Because too often, public engagement remains a consultation exercise. When citizens are asked for feedback, stakeholders are invited, workshops are organized, but if people do not understand what happens next, participation can actually weaken trust instead of strengthening it. So from our perspective, we saw actually during considering our experience as well, 4 important elements also to consider. So first, like you said, very important, Paul, first moving from consultation to co-creation. Definitely agree. One of the strongest principles of the OGP and in general, open government initiatives in the world is that civil society should not simply react to government proposals. They should help shape them from the start. The most effective engagements happen, I mean, from our point of view, when it's upstream, before decisions are already framed, because we see that participation is not about only validating pre-made choices. It's always about improving decisions at the end through concrete collective intelligence approaches. And Luxembourg, as you mentioned it, has an advantage in this area as well, because of its size and institutional proximity as well. It's the country is well positioned also to make this work. Second, accountability must be definitely also measurable. So I'm happy to see that the OGP matrix changed in the meantime, and so we can discuss also about that. Transparency alone, it's definitely not accountability. Publishing information doesn't automatically mean that they create trust. The real questions are definitely who are responsible behind, what changed, what commitments were delivered, how do we track progresses. So maybe we can discuss more about that as well. And most of all, citizens engage also when they see concrete results. So happy to also see this new kind of action plan, more focused on measurement and tangible result as well. Because globally, and this is what the feedback we had also from our international and European partners as well, we can see that many open governance initiatives become very process heavy with a light impact at the end. So this was definitely one of the challenges as well. Third, I would say also that building bridges between stakeholders here in Luxembourg is important as well. Instead of creating silos, I think we should work together. Civil societies must effectively when it can act as both critical voice and a constructive governance partner as well. That means stronger collaboration between institutions, academia, civic actors, local communities. And Luxembourg, I think, has all the ingredients to do that. We didn't give up since the OGP withdrew, since Luxembourg withdrew of the OGP. We faced two different challenges. We tried in different ways to reinvent a little bit the action plan and the ambitions we have since the beginning. But not to hide that, yeah, it was very hard. But we are still here. I mean, trying to get back at the topic in Luxembourg. Thanks also to the help of Luxembourg for Transparency. Thanks to Lena and Ozgan, who also were supporting also we found a kind of common ground, and so yeah, let's go in this way. Like I said, Luxembourg has all the ingredients to manage it. But I wanted also to say that without losing independence as well, just to be clear, it's just about recognizing, I don't know if some people from Luxembourg government are connected to the webinar, but yeah, without losing independence, very important. We are just through recognizing that trust ecosystem are built through dialogue and shared public interest problem solving. So I think, yeah, this is possible. We just need an institutional network to do it. And since the beginning, ETICC is definitely convinced that the participatory democracy can only work also with representative democracy as well. So yeah, citizens and government can definitely work together hands in hands. Also, like you mentioned, it also we try to establish this kind of civic ecosystem here in Luxembourg. It was one of our ambitions. We didn't give up on this ambition. We are still working on it because we think that using open technologies such as civic is definitely a tool and enabler, and not just a strategy itself to boost the trust between citizens and institutions. Technology can widen access and improve transparency, but the platform alone doesn't create definitely participation, and maybe Emilien can also maybe develop about that as well. People engage, and we saw it on the ground. They engage when they feel their voice matters, when the process is fair as well, and when the outcomes are visible. So the real strategy is not digital participation at all. It's trusted participation, most of all, with technology supporting behind that, of course. So just to conclude, to this, the most effective civil society strategy is definitely moving from episodic consultation toward a real and concrete sustainable open government approach in Luxembourg to build long-term co-creation ecosystems where participation delivers visible accountability and measurable public value, definitely. And what I mentioned, episodic consultation, maybe Emilien also could develop on that with the Birger Roth as well. So yeah, Luxembourg at the end, precisely because of its agility and scale, has real potential to become a model in this space, I think, in Europe. So this is what I wanted to share regarding the best strategies, I mean, to advance accountability and public engagement. Yeah, but of course, we can also talk about the trends and the developments we saw in Luxembourg. I don't know if, do you want me to continue on this?
I think Emilien can come in at this point, because you referenced his work, and certainly his perspective on models of participatory democracy that Luxembourg has explored and the various iterations of it. So this is Emily and Paul's research field. So hi, Emilian. If you can comment on some of these points and unmute yourself. What are the trends that your research shows in citizen participation with all the citizen assembly models that Luxembourg has explored and tried? And what have you found in terms of the perception of public officials and Luxembourg's political elites to questions of accountability? So this is, at least these are the sites where the issues of political support and will that we're speaking of flow from. So what is the perception from that level on accountability and inclusive democracy?
Hi, thank you, Lina. So yeah, I'm taking the floor. And let me just say that if we look at Luxembourg and what happened over the last few years, there is a clear diversification of, let's say, citizen participation channel. So Luxembourg has basically moved from a narrow focus on election, representative democracy, occasionally referendum and direct democracy, to a more structured, participatory, and even deliberative forms of participation, of citizen participation. So there are a lot of initiatives at the local level, but I have no time to review them right now. What I wanted to do is more to focus on two crucial and two notable cases that occur at the national level during the last parliamentary term, which is important. I'll come to it in a minute. So basically 2021, 2022, we have witnesses the birth and the organization of two national level citizen assembly, the Klimaatbürgerraad on the one hand, so where citizens were, well, a small representative group of citizens randomly selected from the population was asked to make recommendation on the next draft of the Luxembourgish climate policy, but also the Bürgerkomitee, which was also a citizen consultation, part of a larger stakeholders consultation, by the way, on urban planning, sustainability question, and so on. So just for you to know, these kind of development are not isolated. So it reflects a wider European trends and shift toward more citizen-led or participatory orientation in policy making, basically as a response to a decline in political trust, in a increasingly complexity of policy making, with yet higher willingness from the citizens to be involved in this policy making. So hence showing the limits of electoral politics. If we look at the evolution over the last 10 years, there is also a key shift and a gradual move from referendum as the key and the main alternative to election, and this turn actually occurred especially after the failure of the 2015 referendum that was focusing on granting voting rights to foreign residents, towards a more deliberative models and these kind of randomly selected citizen assemblies. So with the idea of opening up policy making more softly and more symbolically to foreign residents. So just in terms of accountability, referendums rely mostly on electoral style accountability, like they are majoritarian, they're binary, they're highly politicized, so they create clear winners and losers, and in doing so, they reinforce ultimately polarization, and they leave party competition, party strategies at the center of the process. In contrast with citizen assemblies, it introduces a form of deliberative accountability. So legitimacy comes less from election mass voting than from representativeness of a small group of people selected through sortition, from informed deliberation among them, and from collective reasoning. So accountability becomes less about sanctioning, but more about justification. Government are not directly punished by voters or rewarded, but they're increasingly expected to explain how they respond to citizens' proposal and citizens' recommendation. So of course, for political elites, this creates a kind of dual dynamics. So citizen assembly can help to depoliticize complex issue, typically like climate change, reduce short-term electoral pressure, partisan conflict. But at the same time, although they remain in control, they face growing pressure to respond to citizens and to justify themselves on why certain proposals are followed, why certain are not, supposing that at least they do respond to citizens, which is not always the case and has been problematic in certain cases, but I have no time again to expand on that. And for citizens, the pattern is equally ambivalent, I would say. Citizen assembly are generally seen positively. They're perceived as legitimate, as fair and more transparent process, but they see it mostly as a complement to election rather than a pure replacement. And what we have seen also is that their acceptance of this kind of process depends highly on transparency. They want to know how this process works, and they want to know meaningfully how political elites follow up on the recommendations that are made by their peers. So where do we stand now in Luxembourg on these kind of questions? So despite these two experimentation with citizen assemblies, and despite the potential to include a huge part of the population that is basically excluded from electoral politics, so the foreign residents, you have to know that the current government has resisted against the idea of making them more permanent tools of governance. So in January 2026, opposition party like the Greens, the Social Democratic Party, the Pirates, and even the radical left party, the Link, they have all proposed together creating a permanent citizen assemblies in Luxembourg, but the proposal was finally rejected by the right-wing government. So the majority parties argue basically that the parliament and elected politicians should remain the core and the sole legitimate representative of the people's wills. That was basically the core argument that was put forward. And for me, that decision, that recent decision, is particularly revealing, and I will conclude on these points. My short intervention. So it shows that actually citizen assemblies are often accepted as innovation tool, but more as an experimentation than as a permanent pillars of governance system that would be more open to citizens. Often ruling elites are okay to organize these kind of things randomly on specific policy issue, but they remains more cautious when it comes to integrating these kind of tools more permanently into democratic systems. And part of the hesitation reflects actually a broader ideological divide visible elsewhere in Europe also, between progressive parties on the one hand generally supportive of this kind of process and their outcomes, and conservative ones that are more skeptical or opposed to these kind of things. So to conclude, what we see in Luxembourg is not a full democratic rupture, but still a cautious and hybrid transformation. And so the long-term future of, let's say, deliberative and participatory democracy remains still highly dependent on political will. And so it remains kind of unresolved, I would say, in the long term. So if Luxembourg has advanced quite quickly on this question of citizen assemblies, and especially what was particularly promising is the inclusion of foreign residents through sortition, thanks to this kind of citizen assembly, which would have made Luxembourg an original case, even in the world, I would say. The momentum appears to be a bit frozen with the current government. And so, yeah, deliberative assembly, citizen assembly remain largely at the level of experimentation without full institutionalization. But on this question of institutionalization, I will come probably with a few recommendations in my next intervention. And the next election will also be determinant for the future and whether the coalition might change in the future.
there's really important trends there, and certainly a through line of questions of trust, trusting models, trusting the process, but also the last point you make there about institutionalization. And I think that's a good point that Anna Maria can come in to conclude on this, our first round. Anna Maria Musa, Associate Professor at the University of Maghreb and the former Information Commissioner of Croatia. So just from that European vantage point that we've asked you to speak on and to bring in a greater understanding for us on access to information trends, can you give us a sense of what these trends are across the continent and how citizens are redefining their relationship with the state through freedom of information laws?
Well, thank you, Lena, for inviting me to speak this event. I enjoyed listening to all the topics I'm interested to, and I'm working with open data and participation and others. I was planning to first give you a brief overview what I see as being a trend now regarding access to information, then to say something about standards that have been developed in Europe and EU especially, and maybe, and I think maybe this is the most important for Luxembourg as being as trying to promote its access to information law, what are the challenges in implementation? What I saw from my practice, 5 years practice as being first information commissioner in Croatia, but also working later with information commissioners in other countries, helping them to develop their institutions. So briefly, what I'm saying, what I want to say now is that we've seen a tremendous movement towards greater transparency, adopting access to information law in the last 25 years, especially, so from the beginning of the millennium. These laws, right to information or freedom of information laws, have been adopted most often within a greater framework of some kind of a rule of law development or anti-corruption movement, open government even. And also, as seen in the Luxembourg case, pushed a little bit by either EU or OECD or World Bank. So this is important to say that I would not say that many countries have adopted access to information laws free willingly. It was always pushed from the outside, more or less, and very much from the inside by civil society, media, academia, and maybe in these kind of frameworks as open government initiatives, local or national initiatives. So from in the last 25 years, we've seen that it has been adopted in EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is a constitutional level document of the EU, let's say constitutional in essence, Article 42, I think. It's been adopted as a right in a convention on access to official documents of the Council of Europe, which I also want to emphasize this. It took 11 years for this convention to get into the force. It took 11 years for 10 countries, only 10 countries, to ratify this convention. So you can see how the resistance from the national government is present everywhere. So I think 40 countries signed the document, but only 17 in 20 years, a little bit less than 20 years, ratified it. And of course, many countries adopted the right to access information in their constitutions, but also in the special laws. Luxembourg was second last in the EU, so I congratulate that you managed to do that. But the last was Austria. It was 1 year ago or 2 years ago. They were resisting. They somehow, the Austrian government, for example, always insisted on secrecy. And secrecy as a means to protect citizens from, I don't know, intrusion of other people in their lives. That was their excuse for not adopting the law. I'm just saying that you can find any kind of okay, you understand what I wanted to say. So but what happened actually? On one hand, the technological development supported the access to information laws from the 2002, 3, 4, so in the last 20 years. But on the other hand, and this is my first point, the access to information law and the right to information as being a legal right, protected right, somehow lost its pivotal role due to digitalization and these others movements such as open government, open governance, open data. Why did it happen? Because first, access to information laws are very legalistic. It is a court involved here. This is a formal procedure. And in this procedure, there's always citizen against the government. On the other hand, in open government, in participation, there's a kind of a collaboration between citizens and government. So ministries, governments, local governments like to do that more than dealing with access to information requests and laws. So they like to publish a kind of database and say, we did it together with civil society organization, this is what, and get some points, political points for their movement. When it comes to access to information, it's always a kind of conflict between what I think it's my right as a citizen and what they think should be disclosed to the public. And of course, you can see that mainly, I can tell you from Croatian experience that during, let's say, from 2005 to 2018, let's say in these 13 years, many civil society organizations had access to information and transparency in their title. They worked for that, blah, blah, blah. But when everything was set, more or less, then they somehow reoriented towards participation issues and these kind of things. But it was also supported by funding from EU and international organizations. Somehow this access to information has been lost. You can also see it on the international level. Access to information, for example, was very strong, but now they also fight to get some funding to pursue further this access to information agenda. And what is very important, in many countries we've seen some backsliding when it comes to access to information. There are several reasons for that. One of them is GDPR. You can see from 2018, when GDPR came into force, that in many countries, somehow it is like, it was interpreted as, okay, we have privacy, we have to protect privacy, so access to information is not that important. Public authorities use this as an excuse to refuse disclosure. There was a change of political elites. The research has shown that when it comes to access to information and transparency, there's these topics as a topic. I'm not saying that the content and implementation, but at least as a topic is more in hands of central left governments, and that they will be more inclined, for example, Greens and similar, and they will be more inclined to work on that issue to satisfy their voters. So that's also one of the reasons. And of course, we have greater political and economic contexts in which we are living, so confidential information, classified documents also have been gaining in importance compared to access to information. So this is, again, this is my view. I'm not saying that this is 100% correct, but this is what I think. But regardless of that, we have a list of standards that has developed during these 25 years on what is considered to be a good access to information law and practice. I will not go to all of that, but I looked at the Luxembourg law. For example, one of the standards is a restricted list of exclusions, and especially a test of public interest, balance test, in each particular case. For example, Luxembourg law, I didn't see that it says something about balancing rights, but this is, for example, one of the European standards. So in each particular case, the public authority has to put both rights to the information and the right to and the legitimate interest that is protected by the exclusion, for example, privacy or confidentiality of classified documents. There has to be a kind of a decision making. What will be, in a particular case, the result of the procedure. This is one thing. Some other things that I want to say here is, for example, flexibility and speed of procedure. This is very interesting because European Ombudsman did a really good job in promoting especially flexibility and speed of procedure. So compared to regular administrative procedure, access to information procedure should be more flexible, so not requiring a lot of formalities, which, for example, like Luxembourg law is adhering to. The standard, it says that it does not prescribe lots of formalities when it comes to requests. But for example, the European Ombudsman also issued an opinion that also anonymous requests should be answered, and that, for example, the anonymity of requests is also a kind of a legitimate way of obtaining information, because we as citizens and we as public are also anonymous. So information could be given to anyone. So that's also one of the important, yeah. Lina, you want to say something? Or?
I just wanted to say that we were at time for your intervention, and I'm just mindful of Paul's hard stop, and whether you can come back to these points when we come back around, since you have a bit more flexibility than Paul. Okay. Is that okay?
Oh, it's fine.
Thank you so very much. Really very interesting as to just the way in which we're seeing this downward decline, or just the softening of access to information enthusiasm across the region. But I wanted to bring us back to, at least reset the clock, not bring us back, reset the clock so that we get the recommendations of each one of you. And Jameson, if you don't mind, I will ask Paul to go first. Yes? So Paul, if you wanted to continue off from where you were at, and speaking to how Luxembourg can make the most of all the alternative ways of continuing on this path of openness and peer learning as well.
Sure. Thanks, Lina. I'll be very brief, as I know we're limited for time. Unfortunately, I do have to drop off for another call at the hour. But very interesting listening to the contributions. I think what strikes me is the interdependence and the interconnections between all these different spheres of action, whether we're talking about access to information, open data, public participation, you might add many others as well. And that, I think, is the value add that an open governance or open government lens brings. It's the interconnections between these things. It's trying to, because there will be distinct specialisms and expertise. Myself, I've worked on deliberative public participation a lot, but deliberative public participation without a secure civic space and fundamental freedoms environment is very difficult to progress, or without the foundation of access to information or open data. And access to information is a foundation of open government, and indeed countries have to have an access to information law even to join OGP. So I think that's the real value add that an open government process can bring. And I would point to just to take one example, Estonia, coming back to that I mentioned earlier, as a country where we have seen some of these things come together, and the OGP process in Estonia has been associated with increasing administrative effectiveness, the modernization of the government, and the overall increasing openness and trust. And there have been lots of different aspects of that. There's been a co-creation platform which is used for all lawmaking, right from ministerial level preparation through to presidential approval. There's been introduction of a civil service code of ethics, the standardization of participation guidelines for public consultation, advancement of the use of artificial intelligence across the government to improve evidence-based decision-making, lobbying, transparency. All these different things have come in combination. And of course, these are all individually very difficult things to advance and take time. But it's the intersection of all of these things under an open governance or open government umbrella that helps to make them more than the sum of their parts. So it's really about finding the right angles in your own context. Every country works on different issues, prioritizes different things based on the political environment, but the interconnections of those things are there. And just to finish then as well, of course, Luxembourg and all of you are welcome to take part in OGP events, online or in person. You know, we have a series of Europe Dialogues webinars, for example. We just did one on disinformation. We've got one coming up on civic space, so look out for those. Next time there's a global summit or a Europe regional meeting, if you can make it, you'll be more than welcome. All of our knowledge products and commitment data are available online for free. I would recommend the Open Gov guide as a particularly good place to dig into whatever your topic or theme of choice is. And if there is an opening to kind of have a dialogue with the government about reconsidering OGP membership, then we're here to help. But in the meantime, let me just reinforce that whether or not a government is a member of OGP does not have any effect on kind of the level of welcome we extend to all of you as part of the global OGP community. So please do reach out and let's continue to talk about the future of open government in Luxembourg.
Thank you so very much for that recommendation. And indeed, this is not the last. We will be touching base with the OGP. We believe this is just the beginning of a restart of conversations. And I think Sana agrees with that. We are certainly aligned in that regard. I will invite Jameson to take the stage again and just say thank you so much, Paul. You were talking about the value chain of openness, and I want to just kind of bring you back to that. And if you can tell us what in kind of a structural, pragmatic fashion, how do we support the strengthening of the value chain? How do we increase the openness and openness that is meaningful? And how would this be measurable? So openness that is meaningful and measurable, because I think Odin is interested in it being measurable.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. I'll try to keep it brief. And so I think we don't have the data value chain in front of us, but if you do a Google search, you can take a look at that photo, and you'll see that one of the key aspects of the data value chain is this little yellow line that goes throughout the entire value chain called feedback, right? And so citizen feedback, citizen participation, understanding users' needs and demands are really key to the sustainability of open data, and making sure that the efforts that are being made to make these improvements, whether they come from different assessment tools or different standards and things like that, to make sure that they're as useful and impactful as possible, making sure that these are run by the actual people that are using the data is really key. And so we cannot highlight that enough, and I think that's come out of all these different presentations, is that is an essential element, and sometimes it's an element that governments want to skip because it adds another layer of bureaucracy and time and commitment that maybe they're not as well versed in doing, especially when we're talking about agencies like national statistical offices, and they're not as used to engaging with their users and citizens. But going back to tools and standards like Odin, I think it's really important for governments to think of these as not like ranking systems. A lot of countries get really focus on their specific ranking and comparability to other countries, right? But the really useful ones, like Odin, I'm a little biased, are tools that can be used as diagnostic tools, not just rankings for their own sake. So that help countries identify very concrete actions like the ones that I discussed in my presentation about increasing coordination, about the lack of useful metadata so users can understand what's even being measured, about some of the really gaps in these high value data sets. And a lot of these things can also be reinforced by the feedback that is received from users, right? They might have their own, expectations and comments on the findings of some of these standards and so forth. And so taking these kind of, especially like international standards, international guidance, and being able to frame it in a way that is most useful for Luxembourg by basically filtering those through their users in their own countries is something that we really prioritize when we speak to countries. And so it's less of this, yes, it's a top-down approach, but it's influenced by the users and citizens of your country. And that's how you're going to really come out with really the sustainable, improvements that are going to be the most meaningful to, I think, the people in each of these countries and have the highest impact. And so these, I think, are some of the main takeaways. And one last point I did want to make is that, and a lot of people don't think about this, but we've seen this happen with Odin, is that a lot of countries have been successful in getting increased funding and support from their governments by being able to use these types of tools like Odin to show the progress that they're making, right? And so it's, especially now that we're seeing a lot of global donors pull back from financing and statistics and data and possibly all these other openness and transparency initiatives, having increased country ownership and increased country power to support these initiatives is really going to become key. So another way that I think kind of these international standards and tools can be helpful.
Very helpful. And the point about diagnostics and the reluctance of data producers, national statistics agencies, engaging with citizens and being unfamiliar with that. I think that rings true quite well for Luxembourg. And I think Sana can come in there to speak to how then we strengthen civil society's engagement with institutional stakeholders, such as national statistics offices, in terms of strengthening transparency, strengthening collaboration. So data is meaningful, and it builds the trust that you were speaking about in your first intervention.
Yeah, I was taking some notes just also to sum up what I wanted to say to conclude. Luxembourg has its own specificities, let's say. Inclusion values are important, and inclusion has become actually a kind of governance design challenge here. We are very specific, I mean, by its size. We are a small country. We are agile, high connected. Also, we have this greater region, also territory to take into consideration when we talk about Luxembourg. It's not just Luxembourg, just to remind that it's we have to think with a broader approach as well, taking into account the greater region as well. We are multilingual, so very important also to work also on these aspects of multilinguistics, and also the cultural aspect is important as well. So these elements has to be taken into consideration when we talk about Luxembourg. We have a GovTech ecosystem which is going and functioning very well here in Luxembourg. So this is probably a way also to approach probably the government through this space, like trying to create bridges between with GovTech spaces as well, to create civic approach also. Most of all, the main conditions for me to develop this open government initiative in Luxembourg, and maybe in the future, let's see with the next coalitions also a closer relationship with the OGP as well. Definitely the political will. So let's say more advocacy. We need the political will, because we have at some point, I mean, even a citizen will on the ground also. Citizens don't wait for an institutional background and institutional framework already. They are finding ways, they are organizing themselves at city level already. Some groups, some local communities already exist, and we know them. So very important, political will, citizens' will at the same times. As well, like we said earlier, institutional framework, very important, because the government should definitely be in scope. I wanted to say as well that mentioning the citizen will, it's very important to include and to integrate them in the decision-making process, especially right now with we are entering in this kind of AI digitalization area as well. So topics such as AI, governance, human rights, digital ethics, housing, also education are very, very hot topic here in Luxembourg. So these aspects should be taken into consideration. And also another condition very important, like we said earlier, a multi-stakeholder approach and a multi-stakeholder partnership definitely will be key here in Luxembourg to develop that. And this year, starting from the ground, basically, and trying to get in touch with all these potential actors interested to go in this direction, and to create this kind of critical mass also at local level. Open Gov approach is a must, definitely, considering the AI digitalization, like I said. Co-creation, the importance of co-creation. Also, we mentioned it earlier with this sustainable approach to enable more permanent consultation, like Emilien said as well. And yeah, there is the last one, and not the least, and probably the, let's say the most critical one, fundings. Fundings are very important for civil society organization if they want to maintain a kind of long-term also action plan perspective and ambitions in the future. So very important to find a way somehow to get fundings for civil society organization. Finding resources is not really easy, even at sometimes at local, even at European level. At European level, it's another story as well. We are facing. We have faced some challenges, but at both local and European level to get some fundings to fund the projects we have in mind. But yeah, it's a real struggle. At some point, it's a real struggle, and on this point, so starting from the political will and having the coalition on the subject, I think that the next. If the next coalition will be interesting to go in this way, this kind of project should be definitely budgeted with a budgeted line in the coalition for partnership, in the coalition contract. This is very important, because without that, I mean, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for any civil society organization who wants to thrive and to advance in this sense. So this was my sum up.
Thank you very much, Sana.
Thank you so much.
And
I have to say that I was really glad to see OGP again in this conversation. Emilien as well. I mean, all these people are have a very, very interesting perspective on this topic. So happy to see you.
Thank you. And the points you make about just the questions about inclusiveness, inclusivity, democracy are ones that I think current government, and as well what comes of the election in 2028, questions that Emilien is intimately researching and also concerned about. So I'll just over to you, Emilien. So just given just the dynamic environment, demographically, linguistically, as we touched on, administratively and the like, what innovative participation models do you think would help with bridging that, given, the political landscape and moment we're at?
So it's a good question. But of course, as you could feel from my intervention, I'm quite convinced that, especially in the Luxembourgish context, that the citizen assemblies are promising in a certain way. But then, if we really want to give them the power, and if we want them to reach the promises that they have, not normatively speaking, then in practice, I think that one first key point to address is this question of institutionalization. So really give them a real power, not dependent on the political willingness of who is in the coalition, who is in power, that it can live without politician, even if it works in close relation to them. So yeah, for me, the challenges in Luxembourg is not about the resources. We know they are there. It's more about this question of inclusion and implementation, especially in a society that is highly multilingual, highly mobile, and where a large share of residents are foreign. So yeah, I think one first key track to improve is to scale and to institutionalize, make deliberative assembly a regular feature of policy making, and not only in the field of climate policy or environment, but also try to expand it also to other policy issue, although as we mentioned, it's highly dependent on political will. So really to move from experimentation to institutionalization, that's one thing. Also, moreover, if we do that, we need to do it also in a professional and multilingual way. So we need to provide the professional and the multilingual participatory infrastructure behind, so to make these deliberative processes really accessible to the whole population, to make them inclusive. We need it has to systematically include and integrate a professional facilitation and moderation. That's a key point that is not often put forward and often overlooked, but that's really important. And sometimes in Luxembourg, it's difficult to find the right people that are capable of managing this kind of multilingual deliberative processes. And then you have all the question of translation, interpretation, different language communication, and that should work across, well, for deliberative assembly, but across any participatory format, whatever it's in person or digital. I'm not going into the combination of different formats, which is also something I'm working on because time is running. And so a third point, maybe if we move towards more citizen assembly, it's the importance of feedback and a feedback loop with citizens, with participants, to see how the recommendation and how citizens' proposals shape ultimately legislation. That's a key point. And I will conclude on that. There is also a transversal element that is a key, and it relates to why we are here today. It's transparency. So, and partly related also with this feedback loop. If you want to make citizen participation something concrete and in which citizens can trust, political authorities have to communicate, to be transparent on all the choices in terms of design, in terms of decision that are made. And so all over throughout the process, that's a key point. And we know that citizens expect from political authority to be transparent in their communication about these citizen-led processes. And if political authorities want citizens to trust them, again, transparent communication is a key point that is often put aside by political elites, and especially that's something I've learned from the experience in Luxembourg, where communication was sometimes a bit absent or misleading. So yeah, I can conclude on that. And again, thank you for having me. Also a pleasure to hear from the different perspective. That was really insightful. Thank you.
No, and it's really fantastic that you come to the point of feedback loops, which is something that Jameson mentioned in the value chain. So it's really lovely to see how your presentations and interventions connect. I am mindful that we are well over our extra time, but we really would love to hear from Anna Maria as well, because there is the question that we posed to her about the rapid move towards e-government. Luxembourg has been talking about digitalization, digital strategies, and now the layer of AI on top of that. We'd love to hear your perspective of how traditional rights to access is evolving. And do you think governance is becoming genuinely more transparent or just simply more complex? And in the age of AI, we can see what those complexities are looking like.
Thank you, Lena. So, of course, governments in general have become more transparent. That's for sure. We have basically we see tons of information, complexity of information. We as citizens cannot even consume all of that, or at least a part of that. That's why there's a really high importance of civil society organizations, media, and academia to translate all that to the general public in I would say a way that is consumable by regular citizens. For example, I'm not well experienced in financial information, so I would like to see some kind of information on state budget, which is presented in a way that is understandable to all. So these intermediaries are becoming more and more important because we don't know what there exists there. So we have to have some points in the system, civil society, media, academia, that translates it to the general public. The second thing, access to information is still a very important right, and it's a key right, and it has to be built further, implementation of that right. In my opinion, some of the most, I will be short, some of the most important things to do is to train the public authorities. So this is the role, I would say, of independent institutions, such as Commission in Luxembourg. So Luxembourg just took the model of French CADA, to the French legal system countries, such as France, Belgium, Spain, Italy. They all have the same commissions, which are whose members are judges, high-level officials, and similar. This is one model. For example, Croatia has the model based on UK model, where you have one commissioner who is responsible. This gives a kind of more responsibility to the person, and it's required that this person is independent from the government. I came, for example, from the academia, as a professor, and I was not afraid of anyone because I knew that after I finished this, I would just go back to my exams and students and research. So I was not the system person. So, but again, this does not prevent any kind of institution to train public authorities to present good practice examples. And this has to be also done in collaboration with civil society, with media. I would say one good thing that, for example, UK journalists, UK media did in promoting access to information is that from the beginning of their law in 2001, they when they published any kind of news based on the information they got on request to information, they always stated it in the article. For example, in Croatia, nobody knows that that information has been disclosed based on the request because our media says just we got the information. Like it has to be like a bit scandal, or kind of things that they have exclusively gotten. But it's not that. It's extra information. Also, for example, this is one tiny thing, but it helps raising awareness among general public, among civil society organizations, among media, that there is an instrument which could help you obtain information. And maybe the third thing, the public authority, I started to say that in the first part, public authorities have becoming increasingly creative when they have to find a way to keep the information for themselves. So it is, I think, the fear of public authorities that they will be exposed or not even exposed. It doesn't have to be something that they did not do right, but they are afraid that this will just get them into the chain, or it will have a domino effect. And that if they release a kind of information, then they will have to do it over and over again. And there will be a public debate around something that is not that important. This fear can be, for some, encountered in two ways. First, there has to be an equal footing of requesters, so civil society, media, and public authorities, and not this opposing situation where nobody trusts anybody. And the second thing is that maybe, and I, for example, I advise this to in my country, to public authorities, when they disclose information, for example, a document, they can also add this kind of a note explaining what this document is, why it was generated, what is the problem or it's not, to help actually civil society or media or citizen to understand what is it all about. We are not experts on tons of information that public authorities have. So this is, and of course, motivation of citizens. That's Sana mentioned that, Emilienne mentioned that, how to motivate citizens to participate, to request information, to be involved in decision making, especially younger generations, who, compared to, for example, 20 years ago, are not that interested. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, and increasingly mentioning the point of the role of intermediaries, because as governments, we require, either by law and policy, to be increasingly more open. Citizens need to also understand data. Not everyone can read and understand the budget, financial data, climate data. What does it mean? So the key roles for intermediaries, citizen-led groups, and civil society in that. So I know we haven't taken any questions yet from our very attentive audience. We still have people engaged in this very really wonderful conversation. I just wanted to ask if somebody has a burning question for any of our panelists. You can either use the raise hand function or put it in the chat. Going once. Going twice. Okay. So on that note, thank you so very much to the panelists and to the very attentive audience for engaging on this topic of Luxembourg and the future of open governance. We've had a through line from data as well to access to information, running through questions of the engagement of civil society locally and how to get citizens understanding what the data is for and about. This will not be the last conversation we convene on this topic, so look forward to hearing from us again. But for now, thank you so very much, panelists, and a very good afternoon to you all. And I also would like to thank my co-hosts, Timo and Ines. Thank you so much for your support with admitting and putting the bios as well. Thank you so very much, and happy Open Gov Week to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.